Welcome. This is Teach Like a Champion 3.0 overview. I'm Daniel Bowe. Today we're going to be talking about what's new and what's changed in 3.0 over 1.0 and 2.0, if you consider the first edition 1.0. And we'll be talking about the different sections and the techniques included and which ones are new and which ones are kind of repackaged. And in the end, we'll discuss about why you might choose to use 3.0 over 2.0. First, let's talk about what's new in Teach Like a Champion 3.0. The first thing that's new is the inclusion of mental models, which is good because I've been using Teach Like a Champion for maybe about 10 years, a little over 10 years now, as a training manual and, for walkthroughs and that kind of thing. And recently, maybe about 2017, I started including these ideas of the way we understand cognitive structure now. I used a book, which I highly recommend, called Make It Stick, on how to deal with working memory and move things from short-term memory into long-term memory, what kind of habits to have, and how to create that kind of culture in your classroom that rewards not strictly memorization, but memory of important facts that will help drive good discussion. So I'm glad to see that enter into Teach Like a Champion 3.0. One of the other big changes in 3.0 is the new data section in 2.0, which was excellent, isn't really as much in focus anymore, and that is really kind of subsumed into Chapter 3 for Check for Understanding. So in 1.0, he had Check for Understanding. In 2.0, he decided that the Check for Understanding was not broad enough and made a whole data collection and evaluations part in the book, and it appears that he's kind of backed off that. All of the basic things are still there, but it's not quite as detailed. And there's been a change in terminology, along with a little bit of a change in focus from lesson planning to lesson preparation. So it's kind of assumed now that everybody understands how to plan a lesson coming out of teachers college, but my experience says that's not necessarily true, but he's coming from there. And a lot of people co-plan or have plans given to them, and then they need to adapt those plans for that class, and that's what he means when he's saying preparation. So our chapter 2 there is all about lesson preparation, taking that plan that's already been done and changing it to meet your class. So the things that used to be about lesson planning, like objectives and backwards planning, are no longer included, and there's more focus on taking plans that have already been written and adapting them for effective lesson delivery. That's what's called lesson preparation. We have our chapter 3, which is about Check for Understanding, which has a lot of the data stuff, but also some stuff from Teach Like a Champion 2.0 that was in ratio. Things like show me and show call, which are very effective for checking for understanding. So there's been some movement around that kind of stuff. As always, we have a focus on high academic expectations. Here it's called academic ethos. The kind of things that I teach on my first day working with teachers, like no opt-out, right is right, stretch it, those kinds of things, how to get the best answers from kids and how to deal with the question and answering in class. Those are included here. They're staples and they're super important. In chapter 5, we've got lesson structures. So lesson structures are kind of about lesson planning a little bit, but not really. They're more about things that you can use in your lesson plans to really provide good structure for the kids, good routines for the kids. Things like do now and name the steps. They've kind of taken now to name the steps and called it take the steps, because in a lot of cases the steps are already named somewhere and you don't really need to name them. Board equals paper. I use that a lot for teaching students who have no note-taking skills how to do note-taking. And there are several new techniques in here. Accountable independent reading and phase reading are both amazingly important. And I have had a number of engagements with teachers over whether in-class reading is productive or not. And the reality is that most students do not get enough reading outside of class. So we have to have an efficient way of getting students engaged in reading in class for at least part of the class. So our chapter 6 moves on to pacing, which is really important. A lot of times when I'm working with new teachers, I talk about that kind of need, that kind of feeling that there's a driving force, how to keep your classroom feeling like it's moving forward at a good pace. And so this chapter is really good for it. They have all of the standard ones. I haven't noticed any changes. I haven't been super like what I might do, which is write down each and try to correlate them. But having read both at this point, I don't see any big difference between the pacing. We also have the whole the ratio parts with chapter 7 ratio through questioning, 8 ratio through writing, 9 ratio through discussion. The ratio here refers to having students do more of the work and trying to push the intellectual exercise off onto the students. So ratio through questioning is good, and that, like I mentioned about the academic ethos with no opt-out and such, this is also one of the first places that I start with teachers, because new teachers tend not to have good questioning technique. So things like cold call, call and response, break it down, those are all in here. And we'll have special individual videos on each of these, but the call and response is really underused in the classroom to keep kids engaged and to make sure that they are together with us. So building ratio through writing, there's also, as I said, there's not enough reading in class. There's also not enough writing going on in class. There's really not enough of most things going on in class, honestly. But things like everybody writes or revision, how to do revision, those are in this section and extremely important. Building ratio through discussion is our chapter 9. How to build habits of discussion, how to have a disciplined discussion. Most teachers with less experience will, say, hey, turn and discuss. And then, all right, here's your minute, and everybody's done. Can I get an answer? And you find out like nothing has happened. So this is the section that's going to really solve that problem. And then we have procedures and routines, which is chapter 10. This is a staple from the very first Teach Like a Champion. Strong start, threshold, building routines, do it again, all of that stuff, making sure that you build a classroom culture where work is expected and everybody understands how to produce work and how to give their best work. That includes all the things that you need to run your classroom, and threshold, strong start, do it again, all of that stuff. Plus, it talks specifically about engineering efficiency and why you want to do this kind of stuff. And there's a little bit of pushback in this book. How about this? It's not exactly pushback. There's a little bit of adjustment in this book. Number one, Doug Lemoff defends his basic premise here, which is that teaching needs to be effective, and there are effective things to do. But on the other hand, he also actualizes a lot of these in a way that the kind of social justice, educational justice philosophy has entered into the classroom and the expectations of the classroom. So he deals with how these things can be misread and how to deal with people of different cultures, with emotional engagement. So I think that's a good move forward. This book updates itself with current educational philosophy, taking that into account, but it does not cut the legs out from its core philosophy, which is, having high behavioral expectations, having high academic expectations, and getting students to produce. Chapter 11, those are the things that build your classroom, help people understand that they need to be working. They understand that not giving their best work is not acceptable. They need to have productive work, things like what to do, make expectations visible. This is a rename of, the previous ones, Art of the Consequence, Strong Voice. These are all very staples all the way from Teach Like a Champion 1. So in Chapter 12, we have building student motivation and trust. So student motivation and trust, this is really important. Towards the end of whatever, if I'm doing like a 5-day training for teachers, towards the end of that, I'll really emphasize this because, we've been pushing on how to push kids, how to get the most out of kids. But as a teacher, you really have to ride that line of warm, strict. Make sure that you're praising the kids all the time for the stuff they're doing, that you bring joy into the classroom. And so building student motivation, building trust in you as a teacher is important. This section really covers that. And if you're having trouble with, you're a strict teacher and your students are not responding to you, maybe you need to take a look at this section. Well, for our conclusion, why would you choose 3.0 over 2.0? Well, that's a good question. And I think it depends on what style of teacher training you're doing, assuming you're a teacher trainer, or what your motivations are as a teacher if you're reading this as a teacher. I think Teach Like a Champion is better for teacher trainers than it is for teachers themselves. 2.0 is strong on collecting data on students and acting on data on students. And if that is the weakest part of your school, you should stick with 2.0 because it's much more in-depth about how to do that kind of stuff. If, however, your school is generally doing okay with doing formative and getting stuff in class and reacting to stuff in class, wholly support you moving over to 3.0 just for the cognitive areas. So before, when I was using Make It Stick, everything was kind of grafted on. I'm not that bright of a guy, so it's not like I can completely rewrite Teach Like a Champion 2.0 with all of the stuff from Make It Stick included and everything. So my training was a little bit more that the cognitive stuff was kind of grafted at the end of each part or end of each chapter, or sometimes in individual techniques. But 3.0 really is strong on that part. And another reason you might want to use 3.0 is if you're having a lot of pushback from teachers who feel that you're not being culturally sensitive, culturally responsive. 2.0 may look a little too strict in that way. So 3.0 is a lot more friendly to cultural responsiveness, and it includes that in every place. And I think that's great. 1.0 and 2.0 can be misread to imply that, we need to have a drill sergeant-like attitude or something like that, which I don't really get, because we really have the whole high behavioral expectations and student motivation and trust section. Those have all been in there since 1.0. So there's not really any reason to believe that Doug Lemov's goal was to create, some kind of military boarding school. I think that because this is kind of a recipe book, a lot of people didn't get that part of the book. They didn't really read the whole book, and maybe this is why I said earlier, I think this is better for a teacher trainer, because a teacher trainer can read this book multiple times. And I've read 1.0, I read it probably 5 times over 5 years, and then 2.0 another 5 times, basically read it about every year, because there are some things that I forget, or some things that, I tend to favor certain sections, and then I realize, oh yeah, that would have worked well for this teacher, and maybe I failed them. So I want to thank you guys for taking a listen. We're going to break down the individual techniques one by one as we go here. But that's it for this podcast, and I hope that helped you understand Teach Like a Champion 3.0 overview. Again, I'm Daniel Bowe, and thank you for listening.